The party was a masterpiece, her masterpiece. From the soft glow of the recessed lighting to the precise arrangement of white lilies, everything in their glass-walled penthouse spoke of Elena Vance's quiet, formidable elegance. It was their 15th anniversary, and the air hummed with the murmur of the city's most influential voices. Then David raised his glass. He was radiant, his charisma a magnetic force, pulling every eye in the room. He smiled, that warm, familiar smile that had always been her. "Anchor, to the woman who has been my foundation, my inspiration, my everything," he began, his voice smooth as velvet. "15 years ago, I married an angel, and every day since, I thank God for bringing me Chloe." The name hung in the air, alien, sharp. A silence crashed over the room, so profound it was a physical blow. The music seemed to wither and die. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. For a single suspended moment, Elena's mind refused to compute. It was a mistake, a slip of the tongue. But then she saw the flicker of panic in David's eyes, and a glacial cold began to seep into her veins. This wasn't a mistake, it was a public execution. Her life had been a fortress of her own design, a loving 15-year marriage, a thriving career as the unseen architectural genius behind David's public triumphs, a place at the very top of their city's social ladder. She found a serene satisfaction in order, in control. Just hours before, she'd been adjusting a centerpiece, the cool petals of a lily brushing against her knuckles. David had come up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Nervous?" he'd whispered, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Never," she'd replied, leaning back into him. "Everything is exactly as it should be." But even then, something felt off, a subtle dissonance in the harmony she'd so carefully composed. He had been unusually effusive all week, his compliments a little too loud, his affection a little too performative. He'd been guarded, with his phone angling the screen away when she walked into the room, a habit she'd dismissed as him planning a surprise. An anniversary gift, perhaps. She had chosen to ignore it. "We all have our little secrets," she'd told herself. "After 15 years, you grant each other the grace of privacy. You trust." Now that trust lay shattered on the floor of her perfect home, along with the respect of every person in the room. Their eyes were on her, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and second-hand shame. She was no longer Elena Vance, the architect of elegance. She was poor Elena. The title was a branding iron, searing itself into her skin, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. Her breath caught in her throat. She could feel the world tilting, the carefully constructed walls of her life crumbling to dust. But on her face, a mask of impossible calm settled. Her expression did not change. Her posture did not falter. She was an architect. She knew how to handle a structural failure. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her own glass. Her hand was perfectly steady. Her voice, when it came, was clear and cool, cutting through the suffocating silence. "To Chloe," she said, her eyes locking onto David's. "Whoever she is, clearly she's made quite an impression." A nervous titter ran through the crowd. Elena held their gaze, a queen presiding over the ruins of her kingdom. "And to my husband," she added, a thin, dangerous smile touching her lips, "who after 2 glasses of champagne apparently needs a nap." The last guest's footsteps faded down the hall. The door clicked shut. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. It was louder than the party had ever been. The white lilies, once elegant, now looked like funeral arrangements. David stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at the city lights that had always felt like theirs. He loosened his tie, the gesture of a man preparing for a fight. He knew he couldn't win. Elena didn't move. She remained by the empty hors d'oeuvres table, a statue carved from ice. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. The architect in her was already assessing the damage, calculating the load-bearing walls that had just been dynamited. "Who is she?" Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was a request for data. He turned, his face a mess of panic and pathetic regret. "Elena, I don't know what to say. It was a mistake, a slip." "Don't," she cut him off, the single word as sharp as a shard of glass. "Don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else. You don't say another woman's name in a toast to your wife of 15 years by mistake. You say it because it's the name that lives in your head." He flinched. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," she said, taking a step forward. Her calm was more terrifying than any rage could have been. "Tell me about Chloe." And so he did. The story tumbled out of him, clumsy and full of self-pity. Chloe, a junior, associate at his firm, 28 years old. It had been going on for 2 years. 2 years of lies, 2 years of stolen weekends he'd called business trips. 2 years of dinners she thought he was having with clients. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the structure of her reality, piece by piece. The time he'd been stuck in traffic on her birthday, the new cologne she hadn't liked, the sudden interest in a genre of music he'd always hated. It all clicked into place, a grotesque mosaic of deceit. She listened, her expression unreadable. She wasn't just hearing about an affair, she was hearing the autopsy of her marriage. He finished, his voice trailing off into a pathetic whimper. "I love you, Elena." It meant nothing. She meant nothing. Elena finally looked at him, truly looked at him. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a weak, predictable cliché. "It meant everything," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "It meant our home was a lie, our friends were props, our life was a stage, and you just brought the curtain down on all of us." She turned and walked towards their bedroom. "Get out," she said, not looking back. "Elena, please. Where will I go?" "I imagine," she said, her hand on the doorknob, "you'll go to Chloe." The next few days were a blur of managed disgrace. The phone rang constantly. Friends, so-called friends. Their voices were syrupy with pity, a condescending balm she didn't want or need. "Oh, Elena, I am so sorry. How are you holding up, honey? If there's anything I can do." Each call was a fresh wave of humiliation. She was no longer Elena Vance, the poised and respected partner. She was a story, a cautionary tale. Poor Eleanor. The words echoed in the society pages and in the hushed whispers at the country club. She no longer had the stomach to visit. She spent 2 days in the sterile silence of her home, the ghost of the party lingering in every room. She didn't eat. She barely slept. She walked through the minimalist spaces she had designed, touching the cool marble countertops, the smooth leather of the sofas. Everything felt foreign, tainted. It wasn't a home, it was a crime scene. She would catch her reflection in the dark glass of the television screen, a ghost with haunted eyes. The shock was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Who was she, if not David's wife? What was her life, if not the one they had built together? The questions gnawed at her, eroding her sense of self. Then, on the 3rd day, something shifted. The grief, so heavy and suffocating, began to crystallize. It hardened, its edges sharpening until it was no longer a weight, but a weapon. The architect's mind, the strategist's mind, kicked back online. She was not poor Elena. She was the architect. She had designed their life, and if she could build it, she could damn well demolish it. The vulnerability receded, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. He had made a public spectacle of her. He had mistaken her quiet grace for weakness. He was about to learn the difference. Her first call wasn't to a friend or a family member. It was to Marcus Thorne, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the city, a man known less for his legal finesse and more for his talent in financial evisceration. "I want it all, Marcus," she said, her voice steady and clear over the phone. "Not half. All." "That's a tall order, Elena," replied, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "David has a portfolio of private investments he manages through an LLC he thinks I don't know about. The account number is 74B-. She recited the numbers from memory. For years she had managed their finances, the quiet, meticulous work behind his grand ventures. He saw it as bookkeeping. She saw it as gathering ammunition. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. Well then, this just got interesting. Within 24 hours, it was done. Using her detailed knowledge and Thorne's legal maneuvering, they filed an emergency motion. A judge granted an immediate freeze on all their joint assets and the hidden LLC. David's corporate cards were declined. His access to the capital that fueled his business and his affair was severed. He called her, his voice a mix of fury and disbelief. "What have you done, Elena? I can't make payroll. You're destroying the company." "Our company," she corrected him, calmly, picturing his panic. "And you destroyed it the moment you decided your legacy was worth less than a secret." She hung up before he could respond. The shockwave of her first move was satisfying, but it was just the beginning. This wasn't about money. It was about dismantling the myth of David Vance, stone by stone. A week later, Elena re-emerged. The occasion was the annual museum benefit, the glittering centerpiece of the city's social calendar. Whispers followed her as she entered the grand ballroom. Everyone was expecting to see a broken woman draped in black, seeking pity. They were disappointed. She wore a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was down, falling in dark, sleek waves over her shoulders. She looked younger, fiercer, and more powerful than anyone had ever seen her. On her arm was Julian Croft, a charismatic real estate mogul and a known rival of David's. She didn't have to say a word. Her presence was a declaration of war. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, smiling, laughing, letting Julian refill her champagne glass. When people offered their condolences, she would tilt her head with a look of polite confusion. For what? My life has never been more full of interesting possibilities. She found herself in a small circle with some of David's key investors. They looked uncomfortable, unsure of the protocol. "Elena, you look stunning." One of them, a man named Robert, stammered. "Thank you, Robert," she said, her smile warm, but her eyes cold. "It's amazing what happens when you shed 180 pounds of dead weight." The men chuckled nervously. "I do hope David's recent distractions aren't affecting his judgment on the waterfront project," she continued, her tone light, conversational. "I had some concerns about the structural reports for Tower B. The soil composition on that pier is notoriously unstable, but I'm sure he has it all under control." She let the words hang in the air, a seed of doubt planted. In fertile ground, she knew these men. They were sharks. The smell of instability of a distracted and potentially reckless CEO was blood in the water. She watched their eyes shift, the calculations beginning behind their polite smiles. She had controlled the narrative. She wasn't the victim. She was the one with the information, the one who got out. Later that night, back in the quiet of her fortress, she executed her final move. The waterfront project was David's crown jewel, the venture that was supposed to make him a legend, but she knew its secret, its fatal flaw, a cost-cutting measure he'd insisted on against her explicit architectural advice involving substandard foundation pilings. She typed a short, anonymous email from a burner account to the lead investigator at the city's Department of Buildings. It contained no threats, no accusations, just a simple technical question about the compliance of specific materials used at a specific construction site, citing the exact building code he was violating. She hit send. The architect had drawn the final blueprint. This one was for his ruin. The transition was complete. The trembling, humiliated wife from the party was gone. In her place stood a woman who had been pushed to the edge and had decided to build a new world from the rubble. Her world, on her terms. The fallout was not a storm, it was a quiet, suffocating rot. David Vance, the man whose charisma had once filled every room, now found himself in spaces that were too small and too silent. The penthouse, Eleanor's fortress, was sold. His company, his legacy, was dismantled and auctioned off for parts. A vulture's feast he was forced to witness. His name, once a staple of the city's business pages, now only appeared in cautionary tales, whispered over cocktails he was no longer invited to. He lived in a nondescript apartment across town, the kind with thin walls and the lingering smell of other people's cooking. The city lights he once looked down upon now just looked distant. His phone rarely rang, the fair-weather friends had vanished with the fortune, and Chloe, she had disappeared even faster, her youthful ambition having no use for a fallen man. He was alone with the ghost of the life he had burned down, haunted not by what he'd lost, but by the terrifying, dawning realization of what he'd so carelessly thrown away. He had mistaken his foundation for a stepping stone, and now he was in freefall. 2 years later, the air on the 50th floor was thin and smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Elena stood in the center of a vast, unfinished space, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a panoramic view of the city. She wasn't wearing a blood-red dress of vengeance, but a simple, elegant black pantsuit, her silver-streaked hair cut in a chic, modern style. She held a blueprint, but she didn't need it. She knew every line by heart. This was her project, her firm, her name on the door. Her project manager, a young, bright-eyed woman, approached her. "The steel fabricators are on schedule, Ms. Vance. Everything is exactly as you designed it." Eleanor looked up from the plans, a soft, genuine smile touching her lips. Good, nothing less. There was a new light in her eyes. The cold, steely shield she had worn during the war had been replaced by the quiet, unshakable confidence of a survivor. She was still an architect of elegance, but the elegance was now forged in fire, not arranged in a vase. It was stronger, real. Later that evening, she stood on the balcony of her new home, a smaller, warmer space she had designed for herself. It wasn't a fortress, it was a sanctuary. The city lights glittered below, no longer a symbol of a shared kingdom, but a testament to her own resilience. She thought of the woman she was 2 years ago, meticulously arranging lilies, believing that perfection was a shield against chaos. She had been wrong. Perfection was a cage. The pain of betrayal is a brutal architect. It demolishes your world without warning, leaving you standing in the rubble of what you thought was true. It forces you to look at the foundations and see the cracks you chose to ignore. But it doesn't have to be the end of your story. For some, it is the most violent and necessary groundbreaking. It's the chance to clear the debris, to redesign your life on a foundation of your own strength, and to build something new, something honest, something that is finally, truly yours. You learn that the end of a life you loved can be the beginning of a life you respect. And in that, you find a freedom you never knew you were missing. Tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more stories like this.